It was the start of my freshman year at Boston University, and like many international students, I found myself navigating the new culture, the chilly weather, and, of course, the ESL classes. I was placed in level 3, and every day I found myself in the same routine, trying to improve my English, meet new people, and find my way around campus. Mimi, as fate would have it, was also an international student in her freshman year, attending ESL classes. She was in level 2, coincidentally in the same class as my stepmother. I didn't know Mimi at the time, and our paths hadn't crossed yet. One day, I had to visit my stepmom after her class for something. I didn't think much of it, just popped into the room, waved hello, exchanged a few words with my stepmom, and left. But what I didn't know was that Mimi had noticed me the moment I walked in. After I left, Mimi turned to my stepmom and said, "Who was that? He's cute." Apparently, she was quite intrigued and told my stepmom that she wanted to meet me. That moment, unbeknownst to me, would soon become the beginning of something special. As soon as my stepmom got home that day, she wasted no time telling me about Mimi's comment. She smiled and said, "There's a girl in my class who thinks you're cute." Naturally, I was intrigued, but I didn't know who this Mimi was. Her name lingered in my mind, creating an image of her, but I couldn't quite place a face. Curiosity got the best of me, so I asked my best friend if he knew who she was. That's when it all clicked. Mimi was actually Michelle, the same girl I had noticed during the class orientation day. I had a bit of a crush on her back then, though I never acted on it. Michelle, or Mimi as everyone called her, was also known for dating the son of a wealthy African businessman, so I never thought I stood a chance. Finding out that she had noticed me, and even thought I was cute, left me both surprised and excited. It was one of those moments that made me rethink everything I'd assumed about her and the connection that might just be starting. A week later, right after the school break, I found myself in the game room on campus. It was one of those places where everyone hung out between classes. That's when I saw Mimi again. She was with her best friend Nadine, who I already knew since her boyfriend was also a friend of mine. As soon as Nadine spotted me, she greeted me with a friendly hug, the kind of hug you give to someone you're comfortable with. Mimi stood there smiling, a little shy but clearly paying attention. Nadine, ever the bold one, looked at her and said, "If you want to hug him too, go for it. Don't be shy." Mimi laughed a little and, to my surprise, stepped forward and hugged me. But this hug, it was different. I felt something. It wasn't just a casual hug. There was this almost electric feeling, like some kind of energy passing between us. As she pulled back, she locked her eyes with mine for a moment and smiled again. A soft, knowing smile. Yet, she didn't say a word. She just turned and left, leaving me standing there, feeling like something had shifted between us. A couple of days after that encounter in the game room, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I shared the experience with my friends, telling them how Mimi had hugged me, how I felt that strange energy, and how she didn't say a word but still left an impression. One of my friends listened carefully before offering some insight. "You know she's still dating that guy, right? But apparently, things are rocky between them. She suspects he's not being real with her." He went on to explain that her boyfriend wasn't just any guy. He was the type who used his wealth to get what he wanted. He had his own apartment, lived alone, and didn't have to deal with the typical student dorm life like the rest of us. Mimi, as everyone knew, was the kind of girl who could make heads turn. She was sexy, with a smile that could light up a room and a figure that drew attention, especially her curvy backside. Guys would practically compete for her attention. But then, my friend warned me to be careful. Mimi's boyfriend wasn't just rich. He had a reputation for being aggressive. He practiced martial arts, and if he felt threatened or jealous, things could get intense quickly. It was a warning I knew I had to take seriously, even though a part of me couldn't ignore the connection I had felt with Mimi. That same weekend, while I was at home, my stepmom brought up Mimi again. She casually asked, "Have you spoken with Mimi yet?" When I told her no, she shook her head with a smile and said, "She really wants to talk to you. You know, just talk to her so she can leave me alone." She was half joking but clearly hinting that Mimi was still interested. I laughed it off, but promised her that I'd talk to Mimi the next school day. It felt like the universe was nudging me toward her, and now I had made a commitment to finally take that step. On that Monday, I was seated in the computer lab, completely engrossed in finishing up my assignments. The room was filled with students typing away, the sound of keyboards blending with soft whispers. Despite the chaos around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to stay focused, dismissing the thought as just a distraction. But then, I felt a light hand on my shoulder. When I turned around, it was her, Mimi, standing right behind me. Her presence immediately made my heart race, and I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. She smiled softly and asked if I could hurry up with the computer because she thought she had some important documents saved on it and needed to print them right away. Without hesitation, I told her, "No worries," and quickly gave her access. Something about her request seemed odd. There wasn't any hesitation in the way she logged into her email and printed out the documents. It was smooth, too quick. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about the documents at all. She just wanted a reason to talk to me. As she gathered her papers, I finally asked the question that had been lingering in my mind ever since my stepmom mentioned her interest. I leaned in and quietly asked, "Can you tell me straight up what my stepmom told me? Is it true?" Mimi hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, her eyes soft and sincere. "Yes," she said, almost in a whisper. "I've had a thing for you for a while now. I was just afraid you'd reject me." Hearing those words felt surreal. I had admired her for so long, but I never thought she had noticed me, especially since she was already involved with someone else. I admitted my feelings too, confessing that I was reluctant to say anything because she had a boyfriend. But she smiled again and told me not to worry. "I'm going to end it with him," she reassured me, her voice steady, just as the moment between us started to settle. The atmosphere shifted. I saw him, her boyfriend, storming into the lab, his face tight with frustration. He walked straight up to her and, with barely a glance in my direction, commanded her to follow him. The intensity of the situation left a knot in my stomach. She glanced at me one last time before leaving with him, and I was left sitting there, wondering what would happen next. It was clear that everything between us was about to change. Watching him walk away with her, a wave of pain hit me deep in my chest. Seeing her leave by his side, knowing what we had just shared, filled me with a burning frustration. I couldn't shake the image of her being with him, and the thought of her remaining trapped in that relationship made my heart ache. In that moment, I made a vow to myself. I would do whatever it took to take her away from him. I couldn't stand idly by anymore. I'd use every ounce of my strength, charm, and determination to win her over, to free her from his grasp. I knew in my heart that we were meant to be together, and I wouldn't let him stand in the way of that. No matter what it took, I was going to make her mine. After that encounter in the computer lab, the rest of the day felt like a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about Mimi and the way she had so openly confessed her feelings. But at the same time, her boyfriend showing up had added a layer of tension that I couldn't ignore. The next few days were quiet. I didn't see much of Mimi around campus, and I wondered if she had sorted things out with her boyfriend, or if she was trying to avoid any further confrontation. My mind kept replaying the way she had looked at me before leaving with him. It was like she wanted to say more, but the timing wasn't right. By Wednesday, I found myself back in the game room, the usual hangout spot, surrounded by a few of my friends, the buzz of conversations and laughter filling the space. We were playing a casual round of pool when the door swung open, and in walked Nadine. My heart skipped a beat. Nadine wasn't just Mimi's best friend. She was also one of my secret exes. Not everyone knew that Nadine and I had dated briefly a while ago. And for reasons we both understood, but never openly discussed, we decided to keep it under wraps and remain friends. There was no bitterness between us, just an unspoken agreement to move on. She spotted me almost immediately and made a beeline toward the pool table. Dressed in her usual stylish way, she carried that air of confidence that always intrigued me, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of nostalgia and mild nervousness. As she approached, my friends gave her friendly nods, unaware of the quiet history between us. She slid into the seat next to me, casually draping her arm over the back of my chair, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Well, well, if it isn't my favorite pool shark," she said, with a playful grin. Then, without skipping a beat, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a teasing whisper. "So, I heard you and Mimi had a little chat," she said, her eyes glinting as though she knew more than she was letting on. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Now, with Nadine sitting beside me, teasing me about it, I couldn't help but wonder if this was going to stir up something bigger than a game of pool. I glanced over at Nadine, her smirk never wavering, and shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, we talked. Just catching up," I said, though I knew that wouldn't satisfy her curiosity. Nadine always had a way of digging deeper, and I could tell she wasn't going to let this go that easily. She leaned back in her chair, still smiling. Just catching up, huh? You sure that's all it was?" she said, raising an eyebrow. There was a playful edge to her tone, but I could sense the undercurrent of something more. I nodded, a bit unsure of what she knew. "Yeah, we did. But then her boyfriend showed up," I said. Nadine rolled her eyes. "He always shows up at the worst times. But listen, she's serious about you. She's been talking about you nonstop since the lab. Trust me, things between her and that guy are pretty much done. She's just waiting for the right moment to break it off." And she left as her boyfriend, and also a friend of mine, Joe, came and took to the BU Cafe, the room next door, for a little snack. My conversation with Nadine gave me a bit of relief. It felt like things were moving in the right direction, even if slowly. I knew I had to be patient, but I also couldn't deny the growing anticipation of what might happen next between Mimi and me. It was only a matter of time. The next day, I was caught off guard when my stepmom approached me with a message from Mimi. She told me that Mimi wanted to apologize for her boyfriend interrupting our conversation in the computer lab. What surprised me more was that my stepmom had given her my phone number, and also sharing Mimi's too, as she authorized her, of course. But honestly, even without my consent, I didn't mind at all. It was Mimi after all, and I was just happy she had a way to reach out. That evening, as I sat alone in my room, the silence was broken by the sudden ringing of my phone. I glanced at the screen, and when I saw her name, Mimi, my heart raced, an automatic reaction I'd never quite been able to shake. It had been days since we last spoke, and while we were always friendly, I hesitated for a second, gathering myself before I finally answered. "Hey you," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, though my pulse was anything but. On the other end, her voice came through, warm and familiar, with an ease that instantly pulled me in. "Hey, I hope I'm not interrupting or anything," she began, her tone light but carrying a trace of something deeper, something that made me feel like this was more than just a casual check-in. "No, not at all," I replied, leaning forward, sensing there was more to this. "What's up, baby girl?" There was a brief pause, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. Then, she spoke again, this time with a certain calmness, as though she'd been waiting to say these words for a while. "I just wanted to let you know that I broke up with my boyfriend." I paused for a moment, then grinned and said, "Wow, that's amazing. But, are you sure? Are you really okay with this?" I caught myself and laughed, adding, "I know I should have asked that first." We both laughed, and the tension lifted. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to feel. It was like a mix of excitement and something I couldn't quite put into words. She smiled, her voice steady and sure. "I'm definitely sure," she said. "I want to be with you." Then she said, a little shy but full of hope, "So, can we start dating?" "Yes, absolutely." "I thought we were dating already," I said, unable to suppress my smile. We both laughed again. It felt like the moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. We chatted for a while, excitedly discussing what this new chapter would look like. As we hung up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy and anticipation. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next with Mimi. Back then, not having a car made seeing Mimi a real challenge. I had to rely on my dad to drop me off at school, but sometimes, in a rush, I wouldn't get a chance to see her after classes because he had to head back to work. It felt like time with her was always slipping through my fingers. We made up for it by spending hours on the phone, talking late into the night, telling each other how much we loved and missed being together. One day, things changed when a friend of mine, who had recently bought a car, offered to pick me up so I could see her. Mimi and I lived about 20 minutes apart, but that ride felt like it brought us worlds closer. When I arrived, she was thrilled to see me, and the day was off to a perfect start. We settled in, watching a movie and enjoying each other's company, wrapped in the comfort of being together at last. But just as the movie was nearing its end, there was a knock at her door. My heart sank as we both knew who it was. Her ex-boyfriend. He had come to try to win her back. Mimi didn't say a word. She completely ignored him, letting him knock and stand outside, hoping she'd come out. When we finally did leave the apartment, we stepped out together. Her ex was still there, and as soon as he saw her, he called her name angrily. But instead of responding, she simply stopped, hugged me, and pulled me in for a French kiss. Right in front of him. It wasn't just any kiss. It was the kind of kiss that sent a clear message. After seeing that, her ex just stood there for a moment before deciding to leave. Realizing he had lost, she assured me that his presence was nothing and I should worry about it. It was a bold and unforgettable moment, solidifying what we already knew. Our connection was real, and nothing could come between us. The next morning, I saw Mimi, and she was absolutely glowing, a bright smile lighting up her face. I was standing with a few friends when she walked over to me. Without hesitation, she kissed me and said, "Hey babe, how was your night? I tried calling you, but you didn't pick up." I smiled, feeling a little guilty, and replied, "Sorry about that. My phone must have been off by the time you called. I saw your missed calls this morning and figured it'd be better to talk face to face. By the way, I've missed seeing your beautiful face." She grinned and teased, "Well, I've got to take this beautiful face to class. I'll see you on my break." She kissed me again, gave my friends a quick, "Hey guys," and then walked off to class. As soon as she left, my friends, who knew about Mimi's recent breakup, stared at me in shock. One of them finally asked, "Wait, weren't Mimi and her boyfriend still together?" I nodded and reassured them. "No, it's over between them. She's with me now." The routine of barely getting to see Mimi was starting to wear on me. I began seriously considering moving out of my parents' house and getting an apartment closer to the university. Mimi even suggested that I move in with her, but I wasn't too keen on the idea since she already had a roommate, and I've never been a fan of living with other people. My friend, who had a car, started giving me regular rides, and with that newfound freedom, I found myself spending more time with Mimi and also getting to know other friends on campus better. Those rides turned into mini adventures, late-night food runs, spontaneous trips to the city, or just cruising around with music blasting, windows down, and the wind whipping through the car. It was like stepping into a new version of my life, one where I wasn't confined to my parents' house, where I could make my own choices and just be. I started to feel like I was breaking free, realizing how much I'd been missing out on. As the weeks went by, The nights out became more frequent. We'd gather in groups, hopping from dorm to dorm, hitting campus parties, or just finding a quiet spot to hang out under the stars. Every now and then, I'd meet up with Mimi, and each time felt more special than the last. There was this growing connection between us that I couldn't ignore. Then came that night, the one I'll never forget. It started off like any other, just a casual evening with friends, but it turned into something far more memorable. We were all at a small party in one of the campus lounges, the lights dimmed, and music playing low in the background. I hadn't seen Mimi yet, but I knew she'd show up eventually. When she did, everything changed. She walked in wearing this effortless smile, her hair a little messy from the wind, and her eyes locked on mine the moment she entered the room. It felt like the crowd faded away, like it was just the two of us. We ended up slipping out of the party together, finding a quiet spot on campus where we could talk, laugh, and just be ourselves. That night, sitting under the stars with her, time seemed to stand still. We talked about everything: her break from her ex, my own need to break free from the life I'd known, and all the little things in between. And before the night ended, something shifted between us. It was the kind of night where you realize everything is changing, and that this moment is the beginning of something bigger, something real. It was that night the first time Mimi and I got intimate, that one same evening, after the party. Mimi and I decided to spend some special time together at her place, so we left the party a bit early. Her roommate and my ride were still at the party, and we had the house to ourselves for a while. We were just hanging out, enjoying each other's company, and before I knew it, the moment unfolded naturally between us. It was a quiet, private experience, one that strengthened the bond we shared. We made love. I mean deep made love. The combination of orgasm, moans, and cries of joy brought us together to a different level of happiness and satisfaction. As she laid down on her back, and first letting me taste her vagina, and latter penetrate her, the feel of her inner skin on mine was just magical. Her big, juicy, round, light skin booty and long and hard nipple on handful breasts were just appealing and breathtaking. That night, I discovered the other freaky side of Mimi, a real sex machine. That moment was so special that Mimi asked for more, and I can still remember her words. "Please, baby, make love to me again." But a couple of hours later, my phone buzzed. It was my ride, texting to let me know he was getting ready to leave. Since he was my only way home, I had no choice but to go. Walking away felt bittersweet. Leaving her in that moment wasn't easy, but it only made me look forward to the next time we could be together. It was the beginning of something deeper between us. Despite my growing relationship with Mimi, not having a car became a constant source of frustration. I missed dates, couldn't see her as often as I wanted, and I was stuck at home too many times. The distance between us felt like a wall, and I knew something had to change. I wanted to be near her, to make things easier for us. So, I came up with a plan. I proposed to my father that I needed to move out and get an apartment closer to the university. My friend, who used to live with us when he had nowhere else to go, had already moved out and was living near campus. He'd been begging me to move in with him, always reminding me of how convenient it would be. I saw it as the perfect opportunity to solve all my problems. I'd be closer to Mimi, have more independence, and wouldn't have to rely on anyone else for transportation. But my father wasn't convinced. He was against the idea of me moving out, insisting that it wasn't the right time. He believed I should stay home and focus on school without distractions. I wasn't happy about it at all. It felt like he didn't understand how important this was for me, how much it would mean to have the freedom to live on my terms, and most importantly, to be with Mimi without obstacles. Living at home felt more and more suffocating each day. I wanted to prove to my father that I could handle it, that moving out would allow me to balance school, work, and my relationship. I knew deep down this was what I needed, not just for Mimi and me, but for myself too. One day, there was a party my parents were invited to, and Mimi was going to be there as well. During the party, she asked my stepmom if she could come visit me afterward, and my parents were cool with it. The party went on until around midnight, and as soon as everyone headed home, it started snowing heavily. Seeing the weather, I asked Mimi if she would just sleep over at my place and head home in the morning. She smiled, agreed, and stayed the night. It was unexpected, but it made the night even more special. Having her close, even just for that moment, made everything feel right. That night, as the snow fell heavily outside, Mimi and I stayed up talking for hours. The conversation flowed easily, like it always did between us. One thing led to another, and as the night deepened, our connection grew even stronger. Eventually, we made love on my bedroom floor just to avoid the squeaky noises of the bed, sharing a moment that felt natural, deepening the bond we already had. It was an unforgettable night, something that brought us closer than ever before. After that night, things between Mimi and me changed in a profound way. We were even more connected, and our relationship felt stronger. Despite the challenges of not seeing each other often, we found ways to make it work. We continued talking on the phone late into the night, sharing everything from daily stories to our dreams for the future. Every time we were together, even briefly, it felt like we were making up for all the time we spent apart. We had sex occasionally at her place when her roommate was not around. We cherished every moment, and our love only deepened as we navigated the challenges of school, life, and being young international students far from home. A couple of days later, Mimi introduced me to her cousin who lived down south of Boston, and we quickly became friends, growing really close over time. A couple of months later, I decided it was finally time to move out of my parents' house. I was tired of relying on my father to drive me around, and I wanted to live closer to the university. Most importantly, I wanted to be near Mimi so we could see each other more often without all the restrictions. It felt like the right step toward more freedom and, of course, spending more time with her. After multiple attempts, I ended up convincing my parents about moving out and ended up getting an apartment in the same building as Mimi with my friend. But for some reason, he got recalled to go back home as his father was a victim of a stroke and demanded that my friend goes back to take care of family business, which felt perfect as I personally hated the idea of having a roommate. Mimi's cousin, Carol, who wanted to be closer to Mimi, asked me if she could move in with me. At first, I hesitated. Carol was beautiful, just like Mimi, but a bit darker skin, long hair with a big posterior, and had a more outgoing personality, which made me uncomfortable with the idea. But Mimi begged me to let her cousin stay with me, so I finally agreed. At first, everything was going smoothly, but over time, I started noticing a shift in Carol's behavior when Mimi wasn't around. She began acting more flirty and overly friendly, which made me uneasy. It wasn't what I expected, and it was hard to know how to handle it. As time went on, Carol's behavior became even more noticeable. Whenever Mimi wasn't around, she would find reasons to be close to me. Small touches, lingering glances, and teasing comments that were a little too familiar. It felt like she was testing boundaries, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it or cause any issues between her and Mimi. I tried to keep my distance and act like nothing was happening, but the tension was hard to ignore. At the same time, I didn't want to hurt Mimi or make her think something was going on. I started avoiding being alone with Carol as much as possible, always trying to make sure Mimi was around whenever we were in the same space. It became a delicate balance between not wanting to create conflict and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. It felt like I was walking on eggshells, not knowing how to handle the situation without stirring up unnecessary drama. One day, I came home from school, exhausted and ready to unwind as usual. I found Carol sitting in the living room, casually watching TV. We exchanged the usual pleasantries. I greeted her with a simple, "Hey," and she smiled back. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I went straight to my bedroom. Like clockwork, I planned to take a quick shower, as I always did after a long day of classes. What I didn't realize at the time was that Carol had her own plans. As I moved around in my room, I noticed her heading towards her bedroom. At first, I thought nothing of it, but something felt off, and my instincts kicked in. I hadn't paid attention to how quickly she had gone to her room, nor did I anticipate what would happen next. When I opened my bedroom door to head for the shower, I noticed that the bathroom door, just across from mine, was wide open, and the light was off. Thinking it was odd, I walked in and flicked the switch. The sudden brightness revealed Carol standing there, barely covered by a towel, with a mischievous smile on her face. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of shock and confusion flooding my mind. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to process the situation. "What's wrong with you?" She shrugged, her expression still playful, like this was all some kind of game. "Nothing's wrong," she replied casually. "I just thought maybe we could shower together. You know, nothing serious." I was taken aback, unsure of how to respond. My mind was racing. What was she playing at? And this was the last thing I needed. Yet there, Carol stood, clearly testing my boundaries, daring me to react. I could see it in her eyes. She was pushing me to see how far I would go, and the tension in the air was undeniable. Despite her attempts to act as if this was nothing more than a casual proposition, I knew there was much more beneath the surface. Carol's flirtatious demeanor had been escalating for weeks, but this moment made it crystal clear. She wasn't playing by the same rules anymore, and I had to figure out how to handle this without jeopardizing everything I had with Mimi. I asked Carol to leave the bathroom, but she refused. She boldly said that she wanted me and that Mimi didn't deserve me, claiming I was wasting my time with her. She even went as far as to say that Mimi would dump me in a few months. She threatened that if I didn't go out with her, she would lie to Mimi, saying I had tried to take advantage of her. Knowing Mimi, I realized there was a good chance she would be upset and potentially end things with me if she believed Carol's lie. It put me in a really difficult spot. A flood of thoughts raced through my mind. How much I loved Mimi, and how I didn't want to lose her. I was caught in a dilemma and didn't know what to do. I left the bathroom, trying to escape the situation, and went back to my bedroom, hoping to distance myself from Carol. Unfortunately, I forgot to lock the door behind me,